During the First World War, the Royal Navy rapidly improved vessels' abilities to handle aircraft, starting with simple seaplane tenders like Campania, which had a small hangar and only a launching flight deck. Then it would have to stop and use a crane to reload the aircraft, into what eventually became the aircraft carrier, which had a sizable air group that would be contained within a hangar, raised up to a flight deck, which could then launch and land the aircraft without the vessel having to stop and collect the planes from the water. The Japanese would quickly take interest in this type of concept, as they would be able to conduct attacks on hostile vessels without compromising their own, because the carrier itself could be located 100 miles away from the target it's attacking. In 1918, the Japanese proposed converting a tanker into a seaplane tender, but this conversion was cancelled in favor of building a proper aircraft carrier with a launching and landing flight deck with a high speed of approximately 30 knots. While much information into the development of this aircraft carrier has been lost to time, it would eventually result in the Hosho, which was the world's first purpose-built aircraft carrier. That means, from the keel up, it was designed solely to be an aircraft carrier and was not a conversion. While this ship was not a conversion, it is worth mentioning that the hull lines were very similar to that of the development of Japan's then most modern cruisers, which was the Kuma class. This would set a standard for Japanese carrier development that would remain until the end of World War II. Hosho would be constructed during a time when the Japanese Navy was rapidly expanding its numbers, but this would have to change in 1923 with the signing of the Washington Naval Treaty, which restricted the amount of capital ship tonnage that Japan was allocated by the Allied powers. As a result, the under-construction Tosa-class battleships, Tosa and Kaga, and the Amagi-class battlecruisers, Amagi and Akagi, all had to be cancelled while they were in highly advanced states of construction. Fortunately, the Washington Naval Treaty would allow the Japanese to preserve 2 of those hulls for conversion into large 27,000-ton aircraft carriers, and the Japanese would select Amagi and Akagi since their hull forms were more suitable to high speeds and carrying aircraft. However, plans would rapidly have to change again as on the 1st of September 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake occurred, and this caused severe damage to the Amagi's hull, which at the time was on a slipway. The ship was deemed a total loss and had to be scrapped, so the Japanese selected the Kaga to replace it, since by this point Tosa had already been allocated to testing, which would eventually result in that hull being sunk. Initial plans for conversion were along the lines of what had been done to Hosho, where a single hangar with a full-length flight deck would be constructed atop the already complete battlecruiser and battleship hulls. At the same time, the Japanese would be paying attention to foreign power development of aircraft carriers, and, once again, most of the emphasis was placed on the British, whom had converted the Furious, Glorious, and Courageous into aircraft carriers with a unique feature. They had 2 flight decks which could launch aircraft. The British concept would see the Japanese produce multiple designs supporting multiple flight decks, and ultimately Akagi would be designated under design BG-1 and Kaga AG-1, with both designs supporting 3 launching platforms, which is a number that remains unsurpassed to this day. These unique ships would also see them equipped with a battery of 8-inch guns, with them both having 6 located in casemates at the stern and 4 located in 2 twin turrets at the bow on the wings of the central flight deck. By the time Akagi was completed in 1927 and Kaga in 1928, there were advances in aircraft development which resulted in larger, more powerful aircraft, and as a result of the wing turret's position on the central flight deck, the only aircraft that could reliably fit between them was fighters, which within a few years' time would also surpass the width given to them, and the central flight deck would become useless, and a bulkhead was eventually constructed over it, completely closing it off. Considering that these vessels were conversions, their completed products were relatively good, but the Japanese would never be satisfied with the designs, as ultimately being conversions. They lacked the necessary mobility, endurance, aircraft handling facilities, and stability that the Japanese would have preferred the ships to have. The completion of the Akagi and Kaga would put the Japanese in a unique position, as they had maxed out the tonnage allocated to the construction of aircraft carriers in the Washington Naval Treaty. However, they would quickly exploit a loophole, as the treaty defined aircraft carriers as being 10,000 tons or greater in standard displacement. So the Japanese decided if they could construct vessels that could carry, launch, and land aircraft underneath 10,000 tons displacement, then they would technically not be breaking the treaty, and this would result in the next aircraft carrier. In 1928, the Japanese would design an 8,000-ton carrier with a single hangar deck that could carry up to 24 aircraft. This carrier was quickly ordered and began construction in 1929. But shortly after construction began, the Naval General Staff decided to double the aircraft carrying capacity to 48, and as a result, a second hangar needed to be added. Since the design was so advanced and components had already been ordered, it was decided to place the new hangar on top of the already existing one. This would create obvious stability issues, so all armor in the design was sacrificed for this new hangar, and gyro stabilizers also had to be installed within the lower hull of the ship to counterbalance it in the event it should begin to list too much. In 1933, the Ryujo would enter service, being the first loophole aircraft carrier the Japanese would construct, and ultimately the last, as the United States and Britain recognized the loophole that Japan was exploiting, and in the London Naval Treaty, which went into effect in 1931, the definition of aircraft carriers was corrected to any tonnage. By this point, the Hosho would be reclassified as an experimental carrier, and this meant that its tonnage did not have to be incorporated into the total tonnage allocated to Japan in the Washington Naval Treaty, and with some additional tonnage left over from Akagi and Kaga's conversions, the Japanese were able to construct an additional 2 aircraft carriers of approximately 18,000 tons, or multiple carriers of lesser tonnage. On the 12th of June 1933, Naval General Staff Document Number 199 would call for 86 warships to be added to the Japanese Navy. 2 of them would be aircraft carriers, and this would result in Design G6 being developed, which became known as the Flying Deck Cruiser, as the Japanese were under the impression the United States was constructing the so-called Flying Deck Cruiser as well. An alternative option, G8, was also developed. G6 was better as a cruiser than a carrier, while G8 was better as a carrier than a cruiser. At the end of 1933, Design G8 was selected for construction and preparation work began. But on the 12th of March 1934, the Tomozuru would capsize, and Japan would have to rework the stability of its warships. After placing new calculations into Design G8, it was found that G8 would be too unstable and under risk of capsizing. By October of 1934, Design G9 had been drawn up, incorporating the components that had already been ordered and manufactured for the construction of G8's hull to simplify order, manufacture, and time. Design G9 was vastly superior to anything the Japanese had ever conceived, and this would result in the Soryu, which entered service in 1937. Soryu was a significant leap forward in Japanese aircraft carrier development programs, as for the first time the Japanese were solely dedicated to building an aircraft carrier that was highly efficient and effective at operating planes. Its basic design would be the foundation for all of Imperial Japan's future carrier designs. The program that resulted in Soryu was not the only one under development at that time, as simultaneously the Japanese were working on designs G5 and G7. These were additional loopholes that the Japanese were attempting to exploit. They would end up ordering 2 fast tankers and 3 seaplane carriers that, at their basic foundation, could quickly be converted into light aircraft carriers, such as the Zuiho and Shoho. This program of constructing small light vessels that could be rapidly converted was great to Japan at the start of World War II, as they were rapidly able to bolster their aircraft carrier numbers. With the completion of the G5, G7, and G9 design programs, The Japanese decided to revisit the Akagi and Kaga, converting them into a now updated approach to carrier development based off of what had been learned from Design G9. The triple flight deck approach to the carriers would be demolished, their hangars would be fully enclosed by bulkheads, and they would have a single full-length flight deck installed on top of them. Simultaneously, they were also continuing to advance new carrier designs based off of the Soryu, as Design G10 would be produced that would become the Hiryu, which entered service in 1938. The Soryu, Hiryu, and rebuilt Akagi and Kaga would be unique test platforms for different island designs and arrangements, with Soryu and Kaga having small islands placed on the starboard side approximately 1/3 of the way back from the forward edge of the flight deck, while Akagi and Hiryu would have larger islands placed amidships on the port side. Before any of those 4 ships were in service to test the island designs, Japan began working on the next carrier in 1936, which would become Design G11, which was completed in 1937. Design G11 was essentially an upscaled Soryu and Hiryu type design, but it would utilize the portside island design of the Hiryu, and the Japanese would quickly order 2 vessels, with the first one beginning construction in December of 1937. These would become the Shokaku and Zuikaku. During their construction, as the Soryu, Hiryu, Akagi, and Kaga came online and entered service with the island arrangements, it was found there was a preference to the Kaga and Soryu's starboard side arrangement rather than Akagi and Hiryu's port side, and so the Shokakus quickly had a redesign where the island was moved. This meant that Akagi and Hiryu would be the only aircraft carriers in the Japanese Navy to have their islands on the port side. Following the Shokakus, the Japanese would quickly continue carrier development, starting with conversion of 2 ocean liners into what became the Hiryu and the Junyo. These 2 carriers were very unique out of the Japanese carrier development program due to the new funnel arrangement that had been selected, as the funnel would now go up through the flight deck and connect to the rear of the island, expanding the superstructure, and then it would slope out at a 26-degree angle so that smoke did not cover the flight deck. While the conversion of those 2 carriers was underway, the Japanese worked on design G12, which was effectively an improved Shokaku-class design. However, by the end of 1941, it was recognized that the Shokaku class had a lack of flight deck protection, and since the United States and Royal Navy had expanded their carrier programs as well, bombing was a serious threat, and so they would have to redesign G12 into G13, which would be Japan's first armored flight deck aircraft carrier. G13 was still effectively a Shokaku-class design. Overall, the hull, machinery, and internal arrangements would remain identical, but the addition of the armored flight deck would make the vessel unstable. In order to counteract this, they would remove one deck lower in the hull of the vessel, which decreased habitability for the crew, but made the ship safe to sail in the open seas. It was also decided during this time frame in the redesign to alter the funnel uptakes into the same arrangement that was being applied to the Hiryu and Junyo. Design G13 would be ordered for construction, and it would enter service in 1944 as the Taiho. It would be the only vessel of its class ordered, as Japanese designers considered it slightly inferior to that of the Shokaku, even though there were certain aspects of the design that were superior. In 1942, with Taiho under construction, the Japanese would begin work on designs G14 and G15, which, at their basic foundation, was an attempt to improve the Taiho. G15 would come to be selected as the next candidate for construction, though it would never be ordered and would never begin construction. It would appear as the Taiho, though it would be longer, increasing its aircraft capacity, and it would have additional anti-aircraft defenses. June of 1942 would alter the trajectory at which Japan would construct its aircraft carriers, as the Battle of Midway would result in the loss of 4 vessels. As a result, the Urgent Carrier Replenishment Program would go into effect, which called for the rapid construction of 29 aircraft carriers, and the first design proposed in this program was G16, for which 14 carriers would ultimately be ordered. G16 was effectively a copy of the Hiryu, though it would have Soryu accessories, meaning the island placement and rudders would be identical to that of the Soryu in comparison to Hiryu. Due to the rapid collapse of Japan in 1944 and 45, only 3 of G16's carriers would be completed in 1944, with them being the Unryu class. The replenishment program would also call for the conversion of under-construction vessels into aircraft carriers, with 2 notable vessels being the 3rd Yamato-class battleship Shinano, which would become design G17, and the new Ibuki-class light cruiser Ibuki, which its identification has been lost to time, but it would be along the lines of an enlarged Zuiho. Shinano would be sunk at the end of 1944, just before it was completed, and Ibuki would be approximately 80% complete by the time World War II came to an end, and would be captured by the United States. With that, the tech tree of Japan's aircraft carriers is complete. It was an expansive story that started out slow and meticulous, but as World War II dictated different terms, Japanese had to rapidly design and convert vessels to carry aircraft, and this resulted in rushed jobs and non-perfect carriers in the view of the designers, as continuing with the Taiho design was preferred to what became the Unryu or Shinano. Regardless, given the altering circumstances the Japanese Navy was faced with, it can be said that they did design very good aircraft carriers, and ultimately the United States was impressed with the vessels that they were able to capture at the conclusion of the war. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.